employees and retirees to make some choices between their compounded COLAs and simple COLAs and all the alphabet soup that goes into that, and against the state subsidized health insurance premiums. The key to it, according to the Senate President, is this offers employees and retirees something that is constitutional because it offers them consideration.
Well, I would make a couple observations. It knocks that, you work that $400 billion figure between now and 2045 of what it's going to cost the state, and on an annual basis, that's pretty significant if we do nothing. His bill drops that number by maybe 50 versus the bill that left the House of anywhere from 150 to 170. I think most observers would say his bill does not come even anywhere close to what the Madigan bill does or the House bill does in terms of reducing that unfunded liability. What the real fear is that we'll be back here in the next couple of years if that's the bill that passes, just because of the sheer magnitude of the problem.
I can't speak for him, but the Senate President has made public statements that said we could be back here if the House bill is the only thing that passes, because that bill, to his interpretation, is clearly unconstitutional.
The great thing about the pension debate has been we have numerous legislators have emerged as constitutional scholars. The reality is nobody knows what's constitutional or not, except the 7 folks across the street in the Supreme Court building. Whatever passes, with all due respect to the president, it's going to in all likelihood end up in court. We found out since the president unleashed his bill, or let us hear about his bill, that the retired teachers are opposed to his bill, President Cullerton. So in all likelihood, if his bill became law, they would file a lawsuit. So we will see a lawsuit on any pension bill.
How big of an issue is that, since that was, if you will, to use the old term, an agreed bill over in the Senate, that this one group that represents about 35,000 retired teachers is saying, hey, we're going to sue on this thing?
Well, I think, look, whether it's the House bill, the Senate bill, there's going to be a lawsuit. And if you're a retired teacher or current teacher, you, in all likelihood, are very angry that we're doing anything to the pension systems. But as I say to them, we may very well not have a pension system if we don't address this.
One of the arguments that you make in the House bill is that we have exhausted all of our options on trying to get this under control. It's wreaking havoc on the budget, squeezing out education, public safety, et cetera. And there's about 9 pages in there that spells that out. But you're not out of options in the sense that you can still raise revenues to make some of these payments.
Well, we just saw the state, the Democrats, remember the last lame duck session, middle of the night, passed the highest tax increase in the history of the state. At that time, we had about $7 billion in unpaid bills. We're now at $9 billion. So to have that issue of unpaid bills and then couple that with a huge pension problem, we're going to spend $8.5 billion out of a $35 billion budget on pensions. It's not, the ability of raising money, revenue is almost impossible to address this issue.
One of the issues that was the last minute stumbling block last year was not included in the bill that went over to the Senate, and that has to do with the cost shift that Speaker Madigan has been pretty insistent upon for the last few years. Now, he said that we're going to deal with that separately, and later today he's going to sit people down and start talking about downstate schools, Collier County schools, starting to pay their share of the teachers' retirement pension benefits.
Let's back up just a second. That I think it's important, and it fits into this cost shift discussion. I don't think people believe in Illinois that our pension system could go under or go into bankruptcy. We think that happens in other states and other countries. Ours is the worst in the country, and it has to be dealt with in a significant way. The Speaker's come along, and to his credit, has separated them, and I appreciate that, and said, we want the locals to bear some responsibility of making some payments. There's some policy arguments to maybe have that discussion, but what concerns me is several things. One, you're asking them to come in and try to fix or be part of a system that the state, in many ways, really caused all the problems by not making pension payments. So to bring them into the mix and say, oh, help us fix this, I think is grossly unfair, and it can have a significant impact on local property taxpayers in downstate Illinois and in suburban Illinois.
Could that come up again as, let's say, for instance, the Senate bill comes back over here and it starts to get amended? Could that be grafted into it, and all of a sudden you've got this poison pill that kills pension reform?
I think if anybody gets into the business, and I'm not accusing anybody, but if we start getting into poison pills and creating, diversions or picking on issues that are controversial and kills pension reform, that would be a real travesty for the taxpayers and for the annuitants. We have got to fix pensions once and for all and get it to the courts, and let's find out what they have to say.
We've got some other issues still hanging fire as we move into these last few weeks of May.
This is the biggest.
One of those, of course, is concealed carry.
Yeah.
If you don't have a bill that passes constitutional muster according to the appeals court by June 9th here, then anybody could carry practically anything out there.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day that we'll find. There's always the ability to find common ground in an issue if you want to, and I think this June date hanging over our heads is probably helpful, and it creates kind of some awareness to members of the General Assembly. You better do something. So it forces both sides to try to be reasonable, and I think people want to find that happy medium, and I'm hopeful that we do it before we get out of here. Or we may very well be back in June.
As some of the Senate negotiators have indicated, can you really carve out Chicago and Cook County from this and have something that passes?
I don't know, and I have not looked at their language because we've been so embroiled in pensions, and theirs hadn't gotten over here. But look, you've got Tim Bivens, who's a former sheriff from out in the northwest part of the state. He's a bright guy, and my guess is Tim's a gun enthusiast, so he's respectful of that. You've got Senator Raoul involved from the city of Chicago, so I think they're trying to find that happy ground. Time will tell. We've got a few more weeks. This place never gets anything done ahead of time. It's usually a last minute. This is probably a last minute issue.
Also on that last minute list probably is the issue of same-sex marriage. It's passed over in the Senate, but it's still shy a handful of votes from coming to the floor over here in the House.
Yeah, I'm not completely aware of the roll call. I've been told they're a little bit short, but again, I've seen how we're looking over the House chamber. I've seen how this place works. I'm told the speaker's engaged somewhat in trying to pick up some votes on the Democrat side. So I don't know when, but my guess is that it will not go away.
Your party just lost its state chairman, Pat Brady, in part over his early support of gay marriage. You've got a couple of your members publicly on board with this. Will there be any significant support in the House GOP caucus?
Look, we have a party that's kind of struggling. We had a bad election. We've got to be a party that grows. We've got to be a party that's inclusive. We've got to be a party that I think continues to focus on making this a better business climate as a state, shoring up the fiscal problems, and we need somebody that can be strong, can raise money, can be inclusive. So some of the folks I've heard fit that bill, and certainly I would love to see somebody from my caucus in that role, and we have some very capable people.
We'll stay tuned. Representative Tom Cross of Oswego, the House Republican leader, thank you for being with us here on Illinois Lawmakers. Always good to have you. Yeah. Still ahead on the program, we'll hear from two of the top pension negotiators in the Illinois House and Senate on where we go from here with one of the toughest issues that lawmakers, as Tom Cross has suggested, have ever faced in their careers. Democratic Senator Linda Holmes of Aurora shares sponsorship of the Senate's latest version of pension reform with Senate President John Cullerton. She joins Representative Darlene Singer of Naperville, the Republican spokeswoman on the House Personnel and Pensions Committee. Good to have you both here.
Good to be here.
Good to see neighbors back together,
yeah. Yep.
Senator Holmes, the Senate has taken a different tack in arriving at the language that's in your bill. There were lengthy negotiations with the unions leading up to this, and it's all based on a sense of consideration for the retirees and current state employees to give them some choices. Let's hear some of the details. What's in the bill?
Some of the details of that, there is sort of a section that's devised in many ways for younger members in Tier 1 that are going to be affected by this. And their choice allows them to have a 3% COLA, but it's a 3% simple COLA. Future salary increases will be pensionable. They'll still have access to retiree health care, and there will be a 2-year delay in receiving their COLA. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, then the next choice is almost what we call choice B, but then it's broken into two parts. One part being the 3% compounding COLA, no future salary increases are pensionable, and no access to retiree health care. The final option is to have your 3% compounding COLA, although it would be delayed for 3 years. You would pay 2% of your salary would be going into the pensions. In addition, you still would have access to retiree health care once you retire. So those are pretty much the broad sweeps and components.
And this was something negotiated with the help of many of the state workers' unions who are concerned about how this is going to work out in the end.
Yes, several meetings Senate President John Cullerton and I had with the unions, getting their input, and as always, these were not easy negotiations. We as a state were looking to be able to solve the problem, understanding that the unions were not the cause of the problems. It was our underfunding of pensions in the past decades that caused the problem. Yet, in order to resolve the problem, we needed to have some budget relief. So there did have to be this shared sacrifice component to it. And I'm grateful that the union sat down and negotiated with us.
Representative Singer, the House took a different approach. It's a bit more draconian than the plan that is emerging in the Senate, but it was one that most Democrats, quite a few Republicans, felt like they could get behind. Could you go over the broad brushstrokes of the House plan?
Yeah, the broad brushstrokes of the House plan. Basically, what the House plan is doing is it's really focusing on what we need to change in a benefit formula to get us to the point where we can make a contribution to shore this unfunded liability up once and for all. So the strategy was, let's get to the point where we know the state can make those payments, and that's for the unfunded, liability on a basis where it can be done, which we haven't been able to do in the past. And then we can make sure that when one retires until their death, they'll get a pension check. So it's focusing more on COLA reductions for both retirees and those who are, in Tier 1, caps on salaries, which helps to do a couple things, get rid of abuses and some other stuff there. Phased in retirement age, working longer depending on how old you are. If you're over 45, you will not work any longer. If you're coming in the system, you're going to be working years longer, and it's all contingent on what the retirement age is for that system, and more money into the system and an increased employee contribution. So the focus is that, we're really looking at the two things here, that, making sure that when this goes to court, it's first part of it is, can you make that payment? And it has a guarantee, but boy, if you're guaranteeing something, we better make sure we can make that payment.
And you raise an interesting point, and that comes down to the constitutionality of this. There are two different approaches at work here. In the Senate, it's the consideration for the employee to be, or retiree to be able to choose between one form of COLAs and the possibility of subsidized health insurance premiums. With the House, with that really long preamble in the bill that talks about the financial difficulties of the state, it seems to be more pointed toward taking advantage of the state's use of emergency powers to deal with what could be a $100 billion problem.
Yeah, and that is the approach. The consideration piece from the House perspective is that we've done everything we could possibly do to get us out of this problem, and we just can't.
For the Senate, it hinges upon a legal opinion by the senators, the Senate President's chief legal counsel,
right,
that consideration has to be a part of this.
The consideration, giving an option, and the option when you talk about the access to retiree health care, that is not constitutionally protected, whereas the benefits are. It clearly states in the Constitution that those cannot be diminished. I want to bring up one more point, because in our plan, it ended up where the unions, we were not going